Hello everyone. Thank you for taking out time and joining this webinar session. Uh, I would like to introduce myself. I will then introduce our speakers. I'll talk about our organization, I2E Consulting, a little bit, and then we'll start with the webinar session. So let's get started. My name is Vivek Kadam. I look after the sales at I2E Consulting. I've been here for 9 years, and overall, I've had 15 years of experience in customer success and sales. I also act as the account manager for most of our customers. I'll introduce our speakers. So we have Mr. Dave Pendorf. Dave has extensive experience in project portfolio and product management with pharma and life sciences industry. For over 17 plus years, he's led Planisware's large business unit, managing activities across the pharma domain. Throughout his career, which spans for over 2 decades, he has excelled in various roles, right from project manager to solutions architect to strategic advisor, and now a successful public speaker. We have Himanshu Arora. Mr. Himanshu Arora is the PPM practice lead at I2E Consulting. He has over 15 plus years of experience in consulting, deploying, and implementing PPM solutions. Himanshu has a huge experience in pre-sales, business analysis, and solution design. With the proven expertise in delivering a number of projects and into project and resource management, he is our go-to person for all the PPM requirements. A little about our company, I2E Consulting. We are a software services providing company based in the US, founded in the year 2008. Ever since we've started, we've been a very pharma-focused organization. As you can see, we work with some really big names in the industry, be it Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Novartis, etc. We provide business consulting and technology consulting to these large pharma companies. Our offerings, they majorly revolve around project and portfolio management, data engineering and analytics. We do a lot of work in Microsoft 365. And we've also been very successful in the AI and ML domain. Now, we're a partner of Planisware, and we are also partners with Microsoft, AWS, Automation Anywhere, and Dataiku. So yeah, that's about I2E Consulting. Now, I'll quickly start the session. Let me also give you a quick hint about the agenda. We are going to talk about resource management and PPM, and then we'll also talk about the maturity model in the resource management space. You'll also get a lot of insights from the industry, and we'll also be sharing some exciting use cases. Lastly, we'll discuss some best practices, and finally, we'll open the session for Q&A. So without any further delay, I would like to now hand it over to Dave. So please, Dave, over to you.
Vivek, hey, thanks a lot. So as Vivek said, we've got sort of a packed agenda here. If you have any questions throughout, feel free to use the chat feature within the Zoom webinar, and we'll get to those either through writing or at the end there. So, okay, let's talk PPM. Let's talk how resource management drives data-driven decisions. And we're thinking about this. It's PPM, it's the train that delivers your strategic objectives. And if PPM is the train, RM is sort of the engine that makes that train go. Resource management is needed. You need your budget to hire the right staff. You need your forecast to get the right budget. You need to know your roles and how those work together to get a meaningful and reliable forecast. And you need to know how much it takes of each role to accomplish your book of work to deliver on the forecast. When you have all those in place, and that's what resource management is, then the train can accelerate down the track. But what does this engine of resource management in and of itself allow your PPM train to deliver? Well, it's both strategic and tactical decisions. On the strategic side, things like, should we embark on this mix of projects or that mix? Should we accelerate this program or this asset? This is the forecasting and the trade-off decisions that are fundamental to resource management. And when you get that down, then you can start to play. And that's where the fun of PPM really is, scenario modeling. Which portfolio is going to get us a better ROI, revenue for the cost? Can we pivot if we need to? Or within this asset, should we take this clinical approach or that one? Which option of outsourcing strategies is appropriate for our organization and the way we want to deliver? These are the sort of impact analyses that resource data feeds. And then, of course, Classic resource management is finding the constraints, supply and demand, where the demand exceeds the supply of FTEs you have, or the FTEs you have plus the budget you have for external contracting help. These bottlenecks, they're a risk to your best portfolio plans, a risk on the delivery times or risk of blown budgets. But when you can see them far enough in advance, you can take mitigation strategies against those risks to alleviate the bottlenecks. And that's partially where talent strategy might fit in, whom to hire, where, in what geographies, how to retrain existing FTEs. Maybe it's familiarizing certain individuals with other therapeutic areas as your portfolio is shifting over time. And if you have a bottleneck, you need to know, is that a short term where contractors, FSPs can help, or is it something that needs to be supported by FTEs, internal longer run? So Himanshu, why don't you tell us about some of the tactical ways that good resource management data drives the right organizational decisions?
Yeah, so thanks, Dave, for taking us through these strategic decisions. Um, what I'd like to talk about the tactical or the operational decisions which executives can make, leveraging the resource management data. So let's start with an important one, which is, allocating the right resources to the right project at the right time. This ensures that the projects run efficiently and can complete within the defined timelines. But unless we have the visibility into availabilities and the skill sets, I mean, this is a hard nut to crack, right? To make those decisions. If, on the other hand, if you have got the data, I mean, we can make these decisions real quick. Another common issue is the resource burnout. I mean, the burnout can lead to reduced productivity levels, and it can also negatively impact the overall employee performance. So utilization data can be can be looked at, and we can identify the resource workloads, and we can also flag situations where the resources are overburdened, and then we can decide to reallocate the work to other people, or we can simply uh, add more people to get the work done. For the cross-functional alignment, this is also an important one, because we all know that the the projects normally has got heterogeneous teams, so people from different teams work together to work on the common project goals. So resource data along with the PPM data, this can be looked at to find the interdependencies and who's working on what to have a better alignment. Last but not the least, the outsourcing decisions. I mean, these are the decisions that needs to be taken very early in the project. You can compare the resource demand with the capacities that you have got, and then you can see, okay, if you have got surplus or shortage of the skill sets, and then you can take informed decisions to whether to outsource the work to external vendors. So these were the few strategic and tactical decisions which management can take using the resource management data. So Dave, why don't we share the insights from the benchmarking study that you have conducted earlier?
Yeah, certainly. So I spent the first half of this year talking with you guys out there. I interviewed about 20 PPM leaders in this space, plenty from big pharma, but mid-size and biotechs as well, to try and understand, how does their data connectivity at the PPM level work? Where are some of the gaps? How are their data analytics working? Where are some of the gaps? What are they actually doing in artificial intelligence? And number one take home as it relates to resource management, this is hard. So you don't have to take Himanshu and my word for it. Your peers out there in the industry find this hard too. So maybe take some solace. You joined this webinar because you must want to find some ways to improve, and others do too. As I talk to this PPM leaders, I found that they're better connected with finance with their PPM data than they are with their resource planning. Most organizations, big, small, mature, leaders, followers, improving their resource process is something that's on their agenda, something kind of to do in the near or midterm. Something that I found is that almost all of these organizations are utilizing time tracking and capturing actuals, and that's part of their resource management process. I mean, the more mature organizations incorporate the actuals better than those that are less mature. But that's something to note. If you're not tracking your actuals and thinking about how that data could feed forecasting, that's maybe an area to address for you going forward. On the other hand, named resource allocation, actually spending, process tool organizational time to really focus on the individual who's working on what, it's definitely not as common. Some folks are doing it out there. I mean, to some degree, everyone's doing it, right? You get your forecast, you need to know who's going to work on it. But having a formal process, having that supported across functions, having tool to support that, that's what's not so common. It's more left up to the line managers or functional teams to sort of figure that out. And there isn't an expectation of organizational transparency on that individual allocation. And certainly we all talk about AI. There's plenty of hype and shiny objects out there to chase. And within PPM, some organizations are making strides utilizing various technologies to make things more efficient. But as it relates to resource management, there isn't so much out there. There were not any organizations that I spoke with that could, concretely point to, here's how our resource management is really progressing thanks to implementing these artificial intelligence strategies. So those are some of the key findings that I want to take home with you. I mean, it's hard. You can't automate it. Well, what can you do? I mean, certainly you can prepare for AI in the future with good data. And in the meantime, you can work on it. You can roll up your sleeves, put in the sweat equity, and over time, you can mature your processes. I've seen organizations do it. I2E has helped organizations do it. What does that even mean, though, to mature? So, Himanshu, I'll turn it over to you and talk about a maturity model that we see resource management, growing up through the levels.
Right. So resource management is a gradual process and a long-term. I mean, it's a long-term process and span across years. So when a company, when they decide to embark on this resource management journey, or when they actually, plan to level up their game in the resource management, so they first need to know where they are placed in the resource management maturity curve, and then they can decide, or plan to move up the ladder. So this maturing model has got 4 stages: crawl, walk, run, and take off. Every stage has got its own characteristics and indicators. For example, if the companies are at the crawl stage, what does it mean? So basically, they already have got their book of work. They already have the detailed project plans with milestones, right? What they lack is the standard resource management processes. Resource allocation is also very reactive, and basically it is driven by the immediate project needs. Uh, but it doesn't mean they do not do any forecasting. So they do, but they do it at the functional level on month basis, and just for the current year. I mean, this is kind of an annual cycle for them. Now, to transition from the crawl stage to the walk stage, what is needed? I mean, what the company should focus on? They should focus on building the basic framework for resource management, have this resource pool centralized, and their availability is created in the system, right? So the companies which are at the walk stage, so what they do, so they have got the building block ready. So now they are basically doing the activity based forecasting, which is more data driven than the emotional one, which is being done at the crawl stage. And still it's a very manual process. The other important thing that we have seen people doing at the crawl stage is they create some sort of scenario modeling. They create scenarios, simulations of what if analysis. So before they take on any decision, they want to see the impact of those decisions to the overall portfolio. So these are the things that that these companies do in terms of resource management. Dave, why don't you help us understand what are the steps that needs to be taken if you want to move from walk to the run stage?
Well, yeah, when you're talking about running with regards to resource management, most often we're talking about algorithms, a predictive model to generate your forecast, and less reliance in real time on the manual effort. So going back to my study, all of the big organizations are using algorithms to predict resource demand, most across R&D, at least on ClinOps or some of the key areas. I mean, you're running when you can deliver that resource forecast to stakeholders throughout the year. So it's not just the annual operating planning, and that those estimates are not fire drills, and they don't take excessive time to deliver them. Critically, you're running when the forecast data is well trusted within the organization. So then what can you do to take off, run so fast that when you jump, you don't even come down? It's when that algorithm process and the related forecast process is really nailed down. So like for instance, algorithm refinement is part of your process, and everyone takes that as business as usual. Scenario modeling is easy. I mean, it's going to involve some effort, but it doesn't take the organization, again, another fire drill. It's something that can be done in a short time frame to evaluate different scenarios. And then when you incorporate actuals into the decision process, I did this with my hand, coming kind of full circle, bringing the actuals from time tracking to support resource management, both within ongoing projects tactically, with algo refinement operationally, and thinking strategically about how you plan and allocate your resources. Well, let's talk about how we can help organizations, get out of the crawl state, start their process, and then we'll go from there with our 4 use cases. So we'll start off with an organization that came to I2E saying, hey, we need help. Resource management is our goal. We've had these challenges in the past. For a while we could just hire whoever we need, but we're in a different sort of budget constrained environment now. What can we do? But the organization, they admitted freely they were sort of stuck in the chaos state. They had project managers, they got work done, right? And they had portfolio management. It was the bosses, it was the founders making portfolio level decisions, but they didn't really have any PPM processes in place. Those portfolio decisions, they seemed to be more emotional than data driven. And the resourcing process that supported finance, it was supportive of finance. It certainly wasn't supportive of the portfolio selection or any strategic decisions. And that resourcing process was quite painful. So Himanshu, talk about what I2E Consulting put into place for them to get out of this chaos state.
Yeah. So when we engage with this customer, we sat with them to understand their current state and what is the desired future state. And while we were having these discussions with the customer, we got to know that resource management is a very crucial piece that they're looking for. But the problem is that they do not have the foundational processes in place onto which on top of which we can build the resource management practices. So what we did is we advised them to break down the implementation through different phases. In this first phase, what we have done is we have set up the basic PPM process for them, and we have also created functional level project plans. For example, we have created the templates for clinical studies, tox studies, CMC plans, development plans, and the submission plans. And while we were building on these templates, we ensured that going forward, these will be the building blocks for the resource management. So the resource management piece is considered while we were building everything. Okay. Now I would like to show you one of the screenshots from the solution itself. It is just a screenshot. So what you see here is the screenshot from their book of work, and it is the project online implementation that we had done for them. Why project online? Because they were already using the desktop client, which is the Microsoft project. So this was a fit tool for them. For the people who do not know what is Project Online, this is a project management tool, project and portfolio management tool from Microsoft. So, when you look at this book of work, you'll see that, this has got different clinical studies, tox studies, and, the development program all housed under the programs. So we have got these functional level plans. They were separately managed, but they had those interdependencies. On the right hand side, you can also see a snapshot of the Gantt chart. You can see an overarching integrated plan, and underneath you can see the clinical studies and the tox studies. So these clinical and tox studies, they were having their own detailed project plans, which have been managed by their functional teams, and all the data is being rolled up at the program level. So in addition to this, we also enabled the features which they can use for the scenario modeling and all. So now let's talk about the value additions and the best practices for this particular use case.
Yeah, certainly. Now this organization, they know what they have before them. There's transparency, there's alignment on what that book of work is. There's no emotion, there's data there. And the organization, they can embark on projects more efficiently than ever before with the templates. And more importantly, when they were considering options to their portfolio, different assets, different projects, they can use those templates as starting points to really decrease the effort and turn time to produce data for different scenarios. And finally, they empowered the functions. as Himanshu said, there was both a cross-functional plan that sort of like project manager indication level owned, but each function has their own studies or has their own project plans. And yes, they roll up, they talk to each other, but they're separate. So the functions really remain in control of their own destiny, their operational plans, how they're going to achieve their book of work. And when it comes to resource planning, they have better alignment now of what their expectations are to deliver. So some of the best practices, I mean, first of all, remember resource management is a journey. Here we are talking about a resource management webinar and how to drive data with resource forecasts. And yet this first use case was just getting the book of work. I mean, you can't go 0 to 60 overnight. That book of business is absolutely foundational in order to then build resource management on top. And so there is sort of a change management process of allowing transparency and alignment first. But when they did build those templates, they had resource management in mind. I mean, with the support of I2E. So just an example, the medical writers, the resources weren't just, or the resources when they will be planned aren't just going to be at the study. They need to have their documents. So they need to make sure that there was tracking, there was at least milestones for each key document that would drive medical writing demand. And so we actually went through and interviewed each of the functions and asking about the inflection points for increasing or decreasing effort and ensuring those milestones are tracked. So another example, of course, governance needs FPI. FPI is one of the key milestones of a study, and that certainly rolled up. But ClinOps told us that they really ramped up their resources at first initiation visit, which is related to FPI, but not exactly the same. It could be off by months sometimes. And so we talked to the project managers and we had a compromise and say, okay, project managers, can you please also track first initiation visit? And we did put that into the template, and that because that's needed for ClinOps. And the project manager said, okay, well, that's okay, fine. We can track that as well as FPI, but that way we're set up for success as we build out the resource management processes. So finally, on the best practice side, I'll talk about multi-level planning. That's where you have that cross-functional plan and detailed separate functional studies, individually maintained, but talking to each other. I have to admit, it's not necessarily for everyone, but I really do think it's a best practice for most organizations. It will mean that some of your functional teams will have folks that aren't project managers maintaining a schedule, but keep it lean, keep it simple, and you will drive better harmonization across the organization and drive better data, have better data to drive better data decisions when you have that separate multi-level planning. So now let's talk about another company. Here was an organization that really wanted to learn how to walk. So they had gone through what the first company went through, and they were ready now for actual, real resource management. They had alignment on the work to be done. They had an annual budgeting process, and they were in which the functions were putting in the resource estimates. They were doing it month by month by month by month, current year plus next year. So up to 24 columns in Excel that they had to enter with at the end of the day, just a number of FTE count that wasn't really translated or supported by anything behind it, just a number. It was painful for the functions, even more painful for the PMO to put it together. And when there was a change of an assumption, which happens in your annual decision processes, it required another iteration, go back to the functions, make sure they understood that change of assumption, have them change their numbers, and you hoped it made sense what they were changing, that it was related to the change of assumption. And that book of work, it could be modeled for what if scenarios, but pragmatically, that was not part of their process. So ultimately, even though they went through this, the estimates were challenged anyway. There was a belief that the functions were just sandbagging it. And the process was only loosely tied to getting headcount. If enough stink was met, a function could get whatever resource team staff they need. And it wasn't even forward looking. Yes, the functions had to put in 24 columns of data, but that wasn't supporting strategic decisions that were made that need to be made beyond, current year plus one. So how do we set up a robust resource management process for this organization, Himanshu?
So this was the phase 2 for the same customer, and now we knew what was to be done. We need to do the activity-based planning, which was more data-driven, and so that they can get the better and more reliable results in terms of the forecast. So what we have done for them is that first of all we have set up the centralized resource pool, onto which, and this resource pool, this was only have the name, instead of named resources, we only have the generic or the roles in the system. The other thing that we had to do for them is to we have to make some adjustments to the project plan template that we have created for them in the first phase. So what we did is we have created some sort of hammocks in the in the template. So what are these hammocks? These are the resourcing activities which are part of the plan, but still still separate in the plan itself, onto which the resources can be allocated. And so these hammocks are basically, they start from the they start from a particular milestone and they end at a particular milestone. So what happens basically, if the milestone dates are changed, so these hammocks can also, their duration can also change automatically as and when the rates for the milestone changes. And the resource allocation which we have on these hammocks, they also adjust automatically. Okay. I mean, still everything that they've been doing for the in-flight projects, it was all manual. I mean, somebody has to go and do the allocation on those hammocks. But we have also built, preloaded the templates with these, generic resources. And when they start a new project, then they can, change the allocation or duration based on the project complexity and scale. Now, I would like to show you a couple of screenshots from the solution. So the first screenshots, I mean, this shows the hammocks and their allocation on those hammocks. I mean, this is just a snapshot of the entire, it is not part of the entire project plan. I mean, it's just a part of that. But other than these resourcing activities, they've also got, other activities in the project plan. So instead of, allocating resources to everywhere on the plan, so this was the best, one of the best practices to which, you can assign resources to these activities. And similarly, the way we were doing it for one project, the same process we have been using for, for other projects as well. And all this data, the forecast data, these were being, rolled up at the program level. So I'll show you the another screenshot, which is from the report that we have built for them. So, I mean, if you look at this report, so what you can see that we have got our, roles or resources, generic resources, and this demand that you see, this is demand is being generated across the entire portfolio. And we can month on month compare that, since we have the resource pool, we have got the capacities, we can see what is the capacity, what is the demand, where are the bottlenecks, and and if there are any bottlenecks, and what can be done. I mean, we have talked about that. The system has the flexibility to create scenarios. You can do scenario modeling, and whenever the need arises, so then we can have a visibility. We can compare the capacity with the demand and with the scenario, or with the different scenarios, and then we can have take an informed decision and whether to go with scenario one or scenario two. So these are the decisions that they were taking. And the other thing that they've done here is, like, we have talked about that, in earlier stages, what they were doing the forecast outside the system, using Excel and on an annual basis. But here, what they've started is doing the forecast on a more regular basis. I mean, they started with doing with the quarter basis. So this is the additional thing that they've been doing. Now let's talk about the value additions and best practices for this use case.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for one, the process could be repeated. How do you go from annual to quarterly, like Himanshu said? Well, it's because you're not starting from scratch and trying to refigure out what the forecast is each time. You have your book of work, you know what the planned resource on each activity, planned resource load on each activity was. So great, now you've got that again. And the resource estimates were defensible. You could point to the source. So if in a stakeholder meeting, they said, no, there's no way you need, 5 FTs to do that. You could go back and say, well, look, on this activity, look how complex it is. We've got this many subjects, this many sites, you could defend it and point to it and have the logic, through the book of work kind of communicate almost itself. And then think about scenario planning. When we talk about activity-based planning, your resources are planned on the activities. When you shift those activities in time, the resources are shifting with that. And all of a sudden, your scenario planning can be informative without having to go back to each individual function and get the whole new estimate done. So you can really decrease your time. Okay, it may not be 100% accurate, but it's at least directionally realistic to drive intelligent decisions based off of the data. So, okay, you want to have a repeatable forecast. What are some best practices? I certainly encourage spending time to define what does 1 FTE mean. Are you talking about humans, like the whole number of working hours? Are you talking about just the working time, excluding vacation or sick leave? Or are you talking about just the project or study focus time, excluding overhead, training, functional initiatives, town halls, et cetera? Certainly don't assume that everyone's on the same page. Finance will surely have their definition already, and they're going to monetize with some assumption. But the functions might use a different language. They might think about it differently. The project team might have a different assumption in their demands. So it's certainly worth spending time on that. And then you got to build your resource role structure, and encourage you to keep it fairly simple. There's a temptation to go down to the nth degree, especially if you have differences in countries or regions or different therapeutic areas. You might want to think you want to model that. If there's differentiation between each skill that's not fungible. And yet, geez, reorgs happen at every organization. It's every three to 5 years or so, and certainly with more regularity than anyone cares to admit. And reshuffling your RBS is really a pain. I would argue that the value you get from the differentiation of those different examples is not worth the pain in resourcing. And finally, Hammock's, Himanshu talked about those. That way the PM can focus on what matters to them, milestones, while the resource management process gets what it needs, which is resource dedicated work packages. So it limits the burden of schedule maintenance while enabling resource management. So okay, let's move over onto the next stage. Organizations that have a resource forecast process down, but they really want to be more efficient. They want to move some of the conversations from in the moment to what is it going to take? Let's talk about this ahead of time, so we're kind of ready to forecast efficiently. And we talked about algorithms for that. So here's an organization that did have a good activity-based planning cycle, but it was still manual. So it could be repeated, but it was repeatable theoretically, but in practice, it was still an annual process. So they came to I2E Consulting saying, hey, we know about algorithms. We want to see how we can take that next level of maturity and go from manual estimates to something that's more, rigorous. So, and I'll say, even with the activity-based planning, the estimates were still challenged. So it took multiple iterations back and forth at each cycle to get senior management to even present to senior management to get their buy-in. So how did we help them level up, Himanshu?
So the solution was automation, and this specific customer, they were already using Transfer Enterprise, and it is a widely used PPM tool in the life sciences domain. So what we've done is we have designed and implemented algorithms for them. So to generate the forecast using these algorithms, what is basically needed is to define the complexities for each project, right? So so basically what we've done is we have defined the complexities, and these complexities were actually driven by the project attributes. So the combination of project attributes decides whether the project is of low complexity, medium complexity, or high complexity. And the rules that we have written for these algorithms for different functions and for different resources that uses these logics in the algorithms to create a forecast. For example, let's assume that a medium complexity project needs just 5 clinicians, right? And a low complexity project will need just 2.5 clinicians. And similarly, if the complexity of the project is high and the clinicians needed will be 10. So all these rules will be written in the algorithms. And the good part is that you can run these algorithms as and when needed on just one click of a button. You do not need to do the cumbersome manual process to create the forecast. The other thing that we have done for this specific customer is we have also developed an Excel-based resource model. So, you may ask, what is the use of this? If they're already using a sophisticated, robust system. So, writing algorithms and deciding on what would be the logic. So it is a time-intensive work, and sometime it has to be done in an iterative manner to get the right results. So using this Excel model, they were using this as a test bed environment where they can actually, before committing to those algorithms, they can test those algorithms, see if the results are in line with their expectations, and then they can go and do the algorithms in the system. The other use case for this was like if they want to start planning for new modalities. So before they start, creating all those algorithms in the system, they were using these Excel models to, build all those logics in the Excel. When they find, the results are good, then they went ahead and they create the algorithms in the system. I would like to show you a couple of screenshots from the solution. So the first screenshot is basically a bird's eye view of of the all the algorithms that we have built for them. I mean, from this screenshot, you can figure it out that we have got function, and for each function we have got multiple resources, and for each resource we need to write algorithms. And I mean, the base allocation that varies from the project complexity, and the allocation is different. So, and you can also see that we also have a rule set for these algorithms. So anybody who wants to see like how these algorithms work, what is the working factor, or the I mean, it's a term which is used in transfer enterprise, but it is the FT. I mean, how many FTs are there for these different resources? They can quickly look at this view. The other view that I want to show here is the actual forecast that is being generated through these algorithms. I mean, now they can generate these, forecasts just by clicking a button. And the good part is, I mean, they do not need to go inside a project and generate, the forecast. They can select the project in one go. They can create the forecast for their entire portfolio, and they can see the curve for the forecast curve for across the years for their entire portfolio. So this was the screenshot from the tool itself. Now let's talk about the value additions and the best practices for this particular use case.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll accelerate a little bit because I see we're already pushing up against the end of time. I mean, these guys, as Himanshu said, they were able to push a button and get their portfolio forecast. They now can have monthly forecast cycles. And the organization accepts those. They accept the demand because they understand that everyone's gone back and really looked at what does it take to get the work done, sort of in a defined, intentional way. And so there wasn't emotion when they were building those forecasts. And I really like their scenario modeling. I mean, it used to take this organization up to a month to really go through that scenario process, which is, ages in the terms of making decisions on projects or portfolios. Now they can do a scenario model in just a couple of days. Make a copy of the project, change some core assumptions, and click the button and see what a meaningful resource forecast might look like. And outsourcing is a part of their model. Click a button to say, what if we outsource the study? Poof, now that's included in their analysis. Driving decisions with better data. Now, the best practice is certainly keeping it simple. I've seen so many overly complex algorithm implementations, and then 5 years later, they have or even 3 years later, they have a simplification project to relook at those algorithms and reduce the burden of maintenance and complexity. Himanshu talked about the low, medium, high case, and that probably catches enough. I mean, estimates by definition aren't going to be fully accurate. You don't need to try and catch every edge case as long as it meshes over the whole portfolio. We talked about Excel. Don't be afraid of Excel, especially if you're starting with algorithms for the first time. It could make sense. You want to rather quickly see what the impact of your algorithms might be, and rather than take months to implement and test, just put something together. I mean, the first time you run that algo button, there's always going to be a little bit of a sort of a sticker shock as to what the output is, and then you go and refine it before you sort of release it for productive purposes. But if you can do that in Excel faster, then you can make a better decision about what you're going to implement and how, and what drivers will be included, et cetera. And finally, we certainly recommend having a centralized process owner, whether you call that a capability, a center of excellence, or one that I like, resource management office, RMO, PMO, right? So a resource management office. These aren't folks who are going to know what the algorithms should be, but they're going to support the functional SMEs in developing algorithms, maintaining them, making sure that algorithms are informing the refinement over time, making the process run smoothly for the organization, limiting the hurdles, the bumps of change management. So those are some of the best practices of getting to run. Now let's talk about an organization that really wanted to blast off. It was a different organization that had algorithms, they had a regular process, and they still had some of the data questioned each cycle. They had time tracking data, but that time tracking data was at a different level. It was at the indication level, whereas a forecast was broken down by work packages, even within the study or other non-study work packages. So they had a misalignment there, and it was a challenge for them. And with these actuals, it was that centralized resource team that wanted to prove compliance in order to justify using the data in their refinement. So how did I2E Consulting help these guys, Himanshu?
Okay, so for this particular use case, I mean, this was the same with the same customer. So what we did is, I mean, they were already using the time card module of Plans for Enterprise. The objective was to to refine the algorithm that they've already built, but I mean they were not sure like what are the changes that needs to be made. So what we have done is, I mean, we have given them the reports where they can actually compare the actuals with the forecast, and then they can see, okay, how far are we off from the from the forecast, and then they can actually make the I mean, if they see it on a regular basis that this particular uh, forecast is always very off from the actuals, so then they go back and make the changes in the algorithm so that they can have a better forecast coming from the algorithms. The other benefit that they have got using the time card module is that now they can keep track of not only the project work but the non-project work as well, right? And they can see like, okay, who are the people who if and on what things they have been working on, whether they have been working on the project or non-project activities. So I'll show you one of the screenshots from this from for this use case. Basically, it is a Power BI screenshot. We are pulling data from the Plansware application, and we can see the forecast with the forecast coming from different projects, and what is the actual which is being filled against that. And they were using this data to do the comparison, and they were then planning, okay, I mean, if this is the same thing that have been repeated again and again, they are seeing these numbers are very off from the forecast, then we were going back, testing it again in the Excel, and then implementing this refined solution in the algorithms in Planisware. So now let's talk about the value additions and the best practices for this use case.
Yeah, let's do it. So there's a saying, data used is data trusted. By using the time tracking actuals in their refinement process, it actually is going to be a positive feedback loop in getting time tracking to be more widely adopted and increase compliance. The line managers see that their functional heads are supporting their team, saying, hey, we're overloaded. Look, here's the evidence of that. And that way, the line manager can encourage their team to self-advocate through better data entry into the time tracking system. And when forecasts are presented with actuals, they won't always be aligned, obviously. And even though actuals are retrospective and strategic decisions are to be proactive, more data drives better decisions. Now they can see that discrepancy. They can ask about it. It's not just well, we know the forecasts are wrong, or a belief that the data is missing. Like, now they can look at it and see it, and they're in the conversation, ask about the discrepancy, and instead of just sort of complaining about it. And therefore you're elevating the conversation with your stakeholders. And part of that, talking about conversation with stakeholders, is seeing really how much working time is really going to project or study focused time. For instance, they found that higher paid individuals worked less on projects, and that was sort of a mind blow. No boss wants to hear that the people you're paying more are kind of doing less. But it wasn't that they're doing less. They're more involved in hiring, on training, on mentoring. Those individuals are the ones that are assigned to be on your strategic or your functional initiatives, enabling the portfolio. And those individuals have more vacation time accrued. So even though management didn't want to see it, it drove the right conversations about the data, about the forecast, about what resources are really needed, and therefore what cost is really needed to enable and drive and execute on the portfolio. So some of the best practices here, well, this is maybe a hard one. You want to require demand versus capacity reporting whenever a function requests more headcount. Like, basically, don't say yes on a headcount requisition without data proving that the demand is going to exceed the supply, so therefore it's needed. And that non-project time is real. don't assume that everyone across the organization is the same. I wouldn't even assume that you could break it down by regions and have that good enough. Use the data, drive the decisions. Maybe it's different per role. Maybe it's somehow different with other ways to slice up your resources. Accept reality. And so in order to do that, you need buckets within Timecard to track it. And yet you don't want to overdo your Timecard options. So you want to err on the side less is more, but maybe listen to your staff, do a survey, run some interviews, even pilot or POC of what the right granularity of your time tracking to have good compliance, but also meaningful data. So, okay, we talked about 4 real use cases, what folks have done to improve their maturity, how I2E consulting has helped them. So let's go to the next slide about some overall best practices that we've seen through our years working with PPM and how resource management can drive better data decisions. So number 1, invest in your data dictionary. I talked about definition of FTE. Another example is the terms committed versus approved versus planned versus budgeted. Different folks are going to have different understandings, expectations, assumptions of what that means. So spend the time to make sure it's clear, what does it mean? In which tool is which data field tracked? In which report is which definition reported on? And that's going to ease some of the conversational churn throughout the organization. I talked to one company who really had it as a quarterly process where it was the head of analytics went to each function and said, okay, for this quarter is going to be this function. We're going to talk to you about what are some of those gray areas, some of the challenges you've had were misaligned in communication, and what is your definition for this term? Next quarter, they went to the next function. And through this process, it's going to take time, but they're going to align and drive harmonization within their company. Number 2, data is king. Data governance is essential. This is where actuals will prove to be your friend with good data quality. Compliance and accuracy are always going to be doubted almost in any data stream. So spend the time on change management. Spend the time on data audits. Spend the time on scrubbing the data to make sure it's good. I mean, that's effortful. That's usually not someone's job description. And yet the more effort you can put towards good data quality going in, the better the data will be trusted coming out, better decisions will be made, the data will be used more, and it'll be a positive feedback cycle. And the data is going to be needed by AI, right, anyway. So the more time you can invest now, the more time you're going to save down the road, and the better productivity gains you'll get by AI initiatives that are being put into place. So number 3, finance side. Again, this was one of the findings that company after company said they have better connectivity with finance than with resource planning. Well, finance is going to be your friend on the resource planning side. So if you're having any of these projects to improve your maturity, if you're building new capabilities, involve finance as key stakeholders. Even have members of finance sit on your project team, your core team, for instance. Involve them in the process from the beginning. And number 4, in AI, there's no silver bullet yet for the world of forecasting or allocating. So I think it'll come. So don't go chasing any shiny object. Get your data right, have the governance there, get the process buy-in, get adoption that you want this transparency and visibility across the organization, that stakeholders can use the data and it becomes part of their process. And then keep monitoring the AI space because it'll come, and go to conferences, join these webinars, ask I2E Consulting, what are you doing? Have I2E support a pilot, for instance. It's going to come. Just don't sweat it if you're not doing it quite yet. Well, great. Well, hey, we got just a few minutes left before the top of the hour. Let's see if any folks have questions. I see some are coming in.
I've started getting the questions here, so I'll take the first one. It says, what tools do you use if applying AI does not have enough data volume?
Yeah, generative AI needs data volume, right? There's other forms of AI too. There's chatbots, there's predictive estimation. But you can also go out, you can, with consulting services, you go out and get some of industry, or try and mine. And this is something that I know organizations are thinking of doing, mine clinicaltrials.gov, for instance. That's not going to produce resource data, but at least timing, cycle time data, for instance. And that's why, AI isn't quite there. You've got to collect the data over time. If you're stuck with only your own organization's data, right, it does take time to develop that.
Great. We've got another one, Dave. It says, how can organizations scale data-driven PPM practices as the portfolio grows?
Well, that's certainly why it's worth putting in the effort on processes first. I mean, the example of algorithms, if you need to do manual efforts across function by function by function as organization grows, it's tough. But if you have an algorithm process where the discussions happen ahead of time as to what the the various factors are into producing your forecast, that can happen in a scalable way. First you start on the functions that are most important. ClinOps is the classic example. That's where a lot of organizations start. And maybe small organization, they might only have 2 people sitting in CMC, right? And the rest are outsourced. So you don't need an algorithm for that. But as it scales and you start to get into later stages of your clinical development, certainly eventually you start to get into manufacturing even, the technical operations part of your organization is going to grow. And so you don't need algorithms for them on day one, but you do as your organization grows and scales, et cetera. So that's certainly a way to think about it. Also, part of the change management is getting stakeholders to realize that this data is going to inform decisions. In the beginning, time and time again, well, our founders don't care about data. They're just they know best, or they think they know best. The more you can influence them early on with good data, the more they'll seek it. They'll create a vacuum sucking up data. And that's, it's hard for individuals to address that, but that's what you want to try and address sooner rather than later, starting off with just your book of work and then adding resources, and they'll try and consume more data, wanting more process, and helping to feed that cycle.
All right. Got another one here. It says, how can leveraging data-driven resource management provide a competitive advantage in the market?
Well, yeah, certainly. If you can reduce your cycle times because you have less bottlenecks, if you can be smart about your outsourcing decisions so that you're strategic and not just reactive, like, okay, this is a core asset. We are not outsourcing this. Well, we plan for it far enough in advance. We're going to make sure we prioritize our internal resources on it instead of, it's time to, go into the clinic. Gosh, we're going to have to have our FSPs run this, or, we're going to have to outsource the medical writing. That's going to give you a competitive advantage on where it matters most to get your highest return on investment of your FTE, your own investment.
Okay, next up, we have a question that says, how to ensure a smooth and consistent transition from the various stages within the resource management maturity curve?
Well, one thing to note is it takes time. So it's if you're trying to do it all too fast, your organization won't be able to digest it, right? You won't be able to have the necessary change management that it takes for instance, for stakeholders to understand what we're looking at. For instance, there's always going to be the complaint about the data is not accurate, but that taking over time, you're going to improve data quality, and you're going to have folks realize, wait a minute, we were able to drive smart decisions off this data. But that takes time. So not trying to, boil the ocean and bite off more than you can chew is going to help. Calling on I2E consulting to support you is going to help to bring in the best practices and allow your team to focus on the business side and not necessarily the technical data side. That's going to help. And thinking about your tool sets, having best in breed tools and that's going to help over time so that you're not jumping from one thing to the next.
Perfect. We have like the last few minutes left, and I see another question here that says, how does data-driven PPM resource management approach helps in audit readiness?
Well, it depends. What do you mean by audit, right? If you're thinking of like R&D tax credits, which are, very cost beneficial to organizations, having your time tracking is going to support that. But then you want to make sure you're capturing all the time. Well, how do you capture all the time? How do you drive compliance? It's using the data in your resource management process, as I said. That doesn't happen overnight, but it drives the positive feedback loop. So in that sense, having good resource management approach is going to help your readiness for an audit from that side. But I think just having the right resources, do the right project at the right time, they're going to follow SOPs. They're going to do of course, everyone has to follow the law, but having the time because you're not overloaded and overstressed to do things right, to, dot every I and cross every T, I think is also going to support audit readiness as well.
All right.
Good questions, everyone. Thanks for the engagement there. That was fun. Thanks for hosting. Himanshu, thanks for walking through the real world ways I2E consulting is going to support organizations in their journey.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Vivek.
Well,
Thank
thank you
you,
so much
everyone,
for
for
your
joining.
time, Dave and Himanshu. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. We do such webinars once a month, sometimes twice a month. So please follow us on all the social media platforms, and we'll help you with all the upcoming news and updates. So thank you very much, everyone, once again, and have a great day.